good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Thank you for hopping on to today's webinar. We are so excited to have you. We are going to give people a few more minutes to jump in. So while we're waiting, we'd love to see if people could drop in chat where they're joining us from. I see people are already ahead of the curve in doing that, so thank you for that. I myself am in Denver, Colorado. And what about you, Anton?
I'm here in Berlin, Germany. Very hot today.
You said it's into summer. You should be getting cold weather soon, or colder weather soon.
Yes, we're expecting the temperature to drop any day.
We have our first cool day in a while, and it's nice. It's a nice change. I'm not sad about it.
Yeah.
My gosh, I'm seeing a lot from across the U.S. I just saw Mumbai, India, Cape Town, South Africa. Oh my, we've got a couple Germans on the call too.
Yeah.
So exciting to see just how many people are joining us from across the world. So I'm going to go ahead and lead us in for today's webinar. My name is Molly Lord, and I'm a member of staff at Scrum Alliance. And I am so excited to welcome you to today's webinar, Slicing Work, the Key to Adaptability and Self-Organization. So some of y'all may have heard of Scrum Alliance, some of you may be members, some of you may know who we are. But just in case you weren't sure, I wanted to do a quick intro. So we are the first of our kind not-for-profit that serves a global community of professionals. We partner with world-class trainers and provide in-demand professional certifications. And excitingly, and this is a big announcement for Scrum Alliance, we have recently launched our first on-demand micro-credentials that you can take from the comfort of your own home at your own pace. So be sure to check those out as well. We were established in 2001, and since that time, we have issued over 1,876,000 certifications. And our mission is to advance real-world agility by equipping and inspiring the change maker in everyone. As a Scrum Alliance member, you become a member if you earn one of our micro-credentials, if you earn one of our certifications. You get access to some really cool member benefits, including access to our learning journey, which are specially designed courses for our members to keep them learning on their agile journey. You get connected to the Scrum Alliance global community through events such as this. You also get discounts to our gatherings, whether they're a regional Scrum gathering or a global Scrum gathering. And you get access to some pretty cool tools, such as the Retrium retrospective tool and some of our comparative agility tools. A quick tour of your webinar console that you'll be using today for this experience. A couple features I wanted to point out. The first is on the bottom left, you will see a box where you can drop in your questions for Anton at the end of his presentation. I will be moderating that and keeping an eye on it. If you have any logistics or technical questions, please put those in there as well. We also have some related content, including a downloadable version of today's slide deck. And as many of y'all have found, we have the attendee chat where you can connect with your fellow attendees, share your thoughts, what's going on. And then finally, and I know some of you have found this as well, we have our reactions button. And this is going to come in handy later in the webinar. So please make sure you know how to use the reactions. For Scrum Alliance members, you are eligible to earn a Scrum education unit for attending this webinar, and we will be sending that link out in tomorrow's post-event email. In that email as well will be a link to the on-demand recording of the webinar, where you'll be able to access the full recording as well as the full console you're seeing today. So without further ado, I'm excited to hand it over to our host for today, Anton Skorniakov, for Slicing Work.
Cool, thank you, Molly. Now, welcome from me, from Berlin, Germany. Today, we are going to talk about agility, adaptability, self-organization, but not in the typical, with the typical software or product development projects that you may typically find if you Google for agility. I've chosen, because we don't have that much time, to start the webinar with just jumping right in to a project that is not so typical, a project that is inspired by my work with clients. It's not directly from my work with clients. I'm not allowed to share that. However, it's very close. Now, imagine you are working in a public agency And your main task is to provide homeless people and refugees with housing. And suddenly there is a war. And a lot of people are flowing into the country. They are welcome, they are legal. However, there's just not enough space for them to live immediately. And the normal solution that your agency would do in this case would be to use such containers where you have something like a flat inside and create huge settlements of people within such containers. And people living in such containers would have a hard time to integrate with the society, a hard time to find a job, hard time to find a school for their kids because they are outside of towns. And it's still much better than to not have a home. However, some people within this agency have this idea of why don't we ask the people that we already housed in our places whether they would welcome someone new. And that may sound, strange. However, people who are already housed by this agency, and there is over 300-400 buildings with tens of thousands of people living in them. Some of them are actually quite welcoming. They want to help the new people who arrived. They can actually benefit from other people living with them. And the thought there, the idea is that, for example, single mothers with a small child can benefit from another single mother moving in with her if she has enough space, so they can take care of the child together. Of their children together, so one of them, for example, can work while the other one is looking after the children. So there is synergies, there is benefits for people to welcoming other people for a couple of months within their homes. Now, just imagine you have this idea, right? So there is this potential. In a normal environment of a governmental organization, there is no way to act on it. Because normally the way this would be handled is first, you would have to create a concept. It would need an architect to look into whether there is enough space and where there is enough space, a lawyer to draw up some contracts, people who are knowledgeable and know what kind of furniture is needed, what kind of building processes are there. There's several people with several different disciplines who would have to look and create a concept. And after that, there would have to be a real negotiation and a political decision made by the directors of this agency to either go with this concept or not. And after this concept would then be put in place, they may find out that it doesn't work because maybe it's not the single mothers who actually want to welcome anyone else. It's other people. It's maybe some elderly people who actually want to have some other elderly people so they can cook together, because that's actually really, really helpful for them. Or there's just someone else who would look after you if you fall. There is so many different unpredictable things about this project that, typically people working in such an agency, they know that whenever something like that is planned for, the probability of it actually working out is quite low. So what these people tried, and what I'm showing you is, again, not exactly what is happening, but it's close, very close to what they tried to do and what actually worked out, is that there is a multidisciplinary group of people. So all these people who would be needed to create such a concept, they come together in a group, as a team, you could say, and they basically say, why don't we try to house someone, at least one or two people, in one of our already existing buildings within 1 week? And then they go out and they try to do it. They draft something like a contract, an agreement that people would sign. They walk to different residents, and they find out, no, we were not able to house anyone in the first week. In fact, the idea with the single mothers didn't work out, but there were other people who showed interest. And next week, they tried with a second building, actually with two buildings, because they now know a little bit more. They don't have to do some of the preparation work that they did have to do in the first week. So they can try it out in the second week with two other buildings. And now they suddenly are able to house one person. and they were not successful with housing other people. However, they learned from it. And with time, they develop a concept that is not just a theoretical concept, but it's proven by showing that people would actually invite other people to live with them, and people would actually join them. And this concept would actually work, and finally could be agreed and rolled out over all the other 300 buildings that this agency owns. This way, if you're familiar with Scrum, if you're familiar with agility, you see there is iterativeness in this. You see that there is increments. However, this is not about product development. And I would argue that there is a large amount of projects out there today that have to do with a lot of unpredictability that could be dealt with all of those tools that we are really good at in the Agile and Scrum world. Our tools would be really, really helpful there, that don't have anything to do with product development. And slicing work, and that's something that we're going to talk about a little bit later, is, from my point of view, the essential key ingredient to understand how can we apply this, how can we deal with it. Just to give you an example of what other projects could also be dealt with the same kind of tools is, for example, changing a process to improve some product quality or reduce cost, right? So when you have a large organization with thousands of people working in it, and you have the plan that you want to change something about those processes so the quality improves, well, guess what? If you change how people want to behave, you don't know whether they will actually change the way you want them to. Even though you may have the authority to tell them, if it is about a lot of people, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, they just in their mass won't behave the way you predict them to. Another kind of typical project is complying with new regulations. So when you are working in a financial industry or in the industry that is anyhow regulated, health industries, food industries, there is always new regulation coming, and you need to comply with it. And that also typically requires a change in your processes. And very often, this is again dealt with in the same procedure that we've just seen. There is some concept developed, a lot of people participate in the negotiation. At some point, very late in the process, this concept is kind of agreed upon, and it's rolled out just to be found, just for people to find out it just doesn't work. They're still not complying with the regulation. And then trouble looms. Another obvious point where we know this kind of processes apply is starting a new business, starting a new product, starting a new service. Now, when I work with organizations dealing with unpredictability, there is a huge amount of questions that for people engaged in work and change within these organizations that are really, those are real questions, everyday questions that are really important. For example, how can I motivate people? Like, most of my people don't want any change. How can I motivate them? Or another question is, how can we ensure that our requirements are clear? We always find out that whatever we ask for is actually not as clear as we thought it would be when we started. Or we find questions like, who is responsible for this or that, writing this particular thing, checking this particular thing, checking the quality. And this question in any kind of, this kind of questions, they arise in the moment, and they are meaningful. However, and maybe I'll finish the questions first. So another question could be, for typical product owner, how do I make other people respect my decisions? Or if we are a lot of people, how do we coordinate all of our dependencies? And all of these questions are important. However, I would argue that they are secondary, because and how you know, and the way to know that this question is secondary is that if you try to answer such a question in a general way, you will realize that your discussion very quickly becomes theoretical. You would very quickly say, well, in case this is happening, you need to do this. In this case, you need to do that. And then finally, you will try to figure out what are the different factors that it all depends on. And this discussion is not, it will stop being pragmatic. The primary question that I found to be really useful in all of these situations is to ask yourself, what is the current result that we are working on? And with the result that we're working on, I'm talking about the verifiable result. And this is very close to slicing, and we are going to come closer to that. Once you start your discussion by focusing on what is it that we're currently working on, who needs to be responsible for this, whose competencies are needed here, the answer is obvious, and you don't have to discuss it on, move on with the discussion. And it's and whose opinions are important and whose decision needs to be respected with respect to this one particular result. You very fast come to a pragmatic answer. Now, the question is, like, okay, before we move on, let's look a little bit shortly at what are typical, results that people talk about in organizations today, at least organizations that I work with. Very often, the deliverables that we talk about, and I would love you to think about your own organization or the organization of your clients if you're a coach. What do people consider a result? What do people consider to be a valid result, a valuable result that people work for weeks and months? Right? Very often, these are agreements between different people who have different opinions, right? Stakeholders. Or designs of architecture, designs of a product, designs of a service, specifications, things that need agreement, because there is, before we start implementation, before we start acting, a lot of questions that we need to answer. Those results, we call them deliverables, but I would say they are not really verifiable. Those kind of results do not allow us, they do not yield learning in the way that we need it for projects. And this will become obvious in a moment. Before that, I would love to show you a little dynamics that once I've understood this dynamics, it really changed my perception about what is happening in an organization, because you can understand how general this dynamics is. So if you are familiar with something called the causal loop diagram, or causal loop diagrams, this is basically everything that you see in a box right now is a variable. It's something that you could measure if you wanted to, and an arrow is just showing an amplification. So the more questions there are that we need to agree on before we start implementing anything, right? The more questions there are, the more stakeholders we need to involve in such a discussion, right? So the more questions we want to agree upon, the more stakeholders we want to involve. And the more questions there are, the more issues we need to negotiate, right? So there's more people and more questions that these people need to negotiate about. However, the more these two factors are growing, the larger the time it is that we invest into the negotiating of something. And the more probable it gets that a lot of toes are being stepped on and so forth, right? The more time we need to negotiate into something, the harder it gets afterwards. After we start with implementing, and when we find out what we thought was our plan does not really work out, the harder it gets to change anything. So our inertia or reluctance to change once we agreed upon something is reduced. But people who are working in an organization, they know about it. So because they know things are hard to change once we agree upon them, they want all the questions to be agreed upon before implementation. So maybe you are young and you join such an organization, you think, why I won't participate in such a negotiation in the beginning. Once you've experienced such a project, you will know everything has been already decided upon, and later on very few things can be changed. And so you try to push for your question that is important to you, to your agenda, to your position in the organization, to be agreed upon and negotiated in the beginning, which again, increases the amount of stakeholders involved, increases the amount of issues to negotiate, and self-amplifies this dynamics. So understanding that this dynamics is at play in many organizations with every unpredictable project, you just understand by just investing more time in analysis and negotiation, you won't get it done. And I hope that just seeing these dynamics will help you, as it helped me, to see that this is a road to nowhere. I often say to people, when you are digging a hole, the first thing is to stop digging. If you find yourself in a hole, first thing is stop digging. And this is what I hope to achieve with this slide. We're showing you this slide. If you find yourself in a hole, first step is stop digging, please. And now let's get to the place of what are we talking about when we say we slice a project. And for this, I would love us. There is an exercise, and I'm going to ask you to participate in it using reactions that Molly has introduced a little bit before. But before we going in there, I'd love us to just put ourselves into this scenario. So the scenario that I would love you to imagine yourself in is that you've invited 20 guests, dear friends, family, and you are cooking for them. All right? There's 20 people. It's a dinner. There's a lot to cook. It's too big to just start to do it. And you, because it's a kind of a little bit of project, you can plan it. And for planning of this project, there is two fundamentally different ways that you can break down the work in front of you. The first way is to say, what are all the different tasteable things that are going to be on the table? What are all the tasteable things that I'm planning on offering to my guests? There is the salads, there is the other entrees, there is the drinks, there is the main courses, there is the desserts, right? So these are the vertical slices. What makes them vertical is the fact that we can taste them. So even a little dip is a vertical slice. The other way to break down the whole work is to look into all of those actions, all of the different things that you need to perform in order for this dinner to be prepared. You need to wash things, season things, preheat ovens, and so forth and so forth. Those are the horizontal slices. Now, this is really important to understand how different these things are. These two lists are. Once I understand them, and I see a lot of the thumbs up, I will move on. Now, what I want us to do, and there is 5 questions coming, and all of these questions, they are there to highlight how different these two lists are performing when it comes to managing work. And it's a very simple example on purpose. All of the work, I'm pretty sure that most of you, the work that you are dealing with in organizations is much more complicated than preparing a dinner. However, we can see all the dynamics within this simple example. So first of all, I want you to know that if you want to say vertical list, so you can already read the question. If your answer is the vertical list, I would love you to have a happy face as a reaction. And if you say your answer is that it is the horizontal list, I would love you to use the surprised face as your reaction. All right. So the first question is, what of the two lists provides you with an overview? Provides you with an overview of what is going to be there on the table. And I'll wait for a couple of seconds for people to answer. And I see a lot of happy faces. And yes, right. The overview of what is going to be on the table is the vertical list, right? Because this is what is telling me, oh, these are going to be the different dishes. These are going to be the different dips. These are going to be the different entrees. This is what's going to be there. And what list allows me to reduce or increase the scope of the dinner? Right? Imagine the situation where you plan for a long list of dishes that you want to cook. However, suddenly your kids are, they play and someone gets hurt, and you suddenly lose 1 hour of cooking time. What list would you use to reduce the amount of things that you offer to your guests, because you won't be able to, to provide them with everything that you plan for? And again, the right answer is the vertical list. Because if you're using the horizontal list, right, to change the scope, like imagine you have this a large list of activities, and you say, well, oh no, I don't have enough time. I won't wash all the tomatoes that I have. Well, what you will end up with is a lot of salads with unwashed with dirty tomatoes. So you will end up, taking this into a real work with low quality. However, if you can say, well, I guess, with this amount of time, we'll have to cut the Greek salad. It's just not going to work out. This is the one thing that takes too much time. We'll take something simpler. right? So reducing scope, managing scope is something that you can do with vertical slices and you cannot do with horizontal slices. Now this, for most people, this is very simple. However, think of it about your organization that you're coming from. What I see in many organizations is that people are overwhelmed. A lot of people are overworked. Burnout is a real problem. And when we ask ourselves, well, how can we reduce the amount of work that we have? If all we have are different activities that we do, we can reduce one activity. We can, for example, reduce the fact that we wanted to wash wash our tomatoes, but once we kind of add everything to the salad, we will then see, but those tomatoes aren't washed. Well, I guess I'll have to wash them. And so the amount of work doesn't really, is typically because most people, try to deliver what is of a high quality, they end up not really reducing the amount of work. And typically, you won't be able to have an overview of what it is that you're actually reducing if you just reduce one action. If you planned to send out a lot of important emails to important stakeholders and you say, well, I don't have time for that, I'll just leave it out. Typically, what you will end up with is something else that is sabotaged by that, right? So this, because this one activity, this one email to stakeholders, it was part of something bigger, part of something that was valuable, and all of the other activities that belong to the same thing will be compromised because of not taking one particular action. So reducing scope, managing scope, is only possible using these dishes. And in many organizations, in most projects, we don't have this vertical list. Everything that we have is the main result that we're going to have in the very end. Let's move on. Let's say you have made your mind up. No matter what comes, you have to cook one certain amount of dishes, and kind of the scope of your meal is fixed, right? So you have a list of things, they need to be cooked no matter what. Which list will help you to optimize the amount of time and effort needed to cook this fixed scope? Is it the horizontal slice, so it's the surprised face, or is it the vertical slice, the happy face? Yes, and what I see is, well, I'll wait for a couple of more seconds. All right, I only see right emojis, all the surprised faces. Exactly. The horizontal slices are tremendously useful to help us reduce the amount of work needed to deliver a fixed scope. And why is that? Well, if we know we are going to cook, say, 4 different dishes that all involve cooked potatoes in them, then you definitely can, wash the potatoes, peel all of the potatoes, and cook all the potatoes for all the 4 dishes together. And that reduces the amount of time. So you can combine things, you can create synergies within your work. And that is the main reason why this horizontal slicing of work, it improves efficiency, right? Efficiency means we have a fixed goal and we achieve this goal with the minimal amount of resources, minimum amount of time, right? So the horizontal list is tremendously important for minimizing the effort. However, what happens if suddenly things do change? Just as a thought experiment. What if some things does change and you do have to reduce the scope, and you say have to throw out 2 of the 4 dishes where you wanted to use cooked potatoes? If that's what happens, then it means, and you before that peeled and cooked them, it means that you've created waste, right? You now have peeled potatoes and cooked potatoes that you don't want to use, and you actually invested time into something that you will throw out afterwards. So you kind of try to be efficient, but you weren't efficient if you need to change the scope afterwards. So all of this is really tremendously relying on the fact that the scope of our dinner is fixed. If it is fixed, the efficiency is what we're going for. So with this example of if the scope changes afterwards, you maybe can see that even in this simple example, optimizing for efficiency within any project it compromises adaptability. And this is something you cannot change. It doesn't have anything to do with Scrum. It doesn't have anything to do with project management. It's by nature of work. If you are optimizing for efficiency, and this typically means you are creating specializations, you are combining things together, you compromise adaptability at the same time. That's a fundamental rule of work. Now, let's imagine you want to have help, all right? You want to delegate work to other people. Which items from which list would you delegate to another expert cook? Say it's your neighbor who's come to help you. Items from the vertical slices list, which is the happy face, or from a horizontal list, which is the surprised face. What do you think? Items from which list would you delegate? Surprise to an expert cook? Well, so if I have an expert cook, I would delegate a whole dish to them, right? I wouldn't tell them, oh, please just peel the potatoes, right? And the second question, the big question, what happens when you have to delegate to your kids, at least to my kids? Well, when I ask them to do something for me, I typically give them one single task. I tell them, could you please peel the potatoes for me, right? And that has something to do with how much I trust in their capabilities. It has also something to do with how will I check for quality. And this is a very important topic that I would love to dive into for a couple of minutes. Now, when I give work to my kids and they peel the potatoes, what is the way for me to check the quality of this work? I would have to take the potato and look at it, right? Is it peeled well? If there's still some skin on it, it's not peeled well, right? So let's imagine I'm a good father. I'm providing helpful feedback, right? And my kids are improving. What will they improve on? Like what are they going to become in a year? They're going to become great potato peelers, right? Now, they're never going to become people who create great fried potatoes. However, if I delegate to someone to create fried potatoes, what is the way for me to check the quality of that? I will taste it, right? I will taste it in the same way as a guest of my party would do this. And that is a very important part, because this example is very simple, right? Anyone, I guess, can peel potatoes. But if we transfer this into our work, in our daily work, into the example of this agency, the work of an architect can only be checked by another architect. The work of a designer can only be checked by a designer. The work of a programmer can only be checked by a programmer. While the actual concept, whether a person is happy living in a new building, this can be checked by anyone else. You know, you can go to them and ask, well, are you happy living in this building? Is it better for you to be here than in this container, right? So that's a very important difference. When we delegate a vertical slice to someone, the quality assurance process involves an outside, involves an outside perspective of a client, in this case, a guest of a dinner party. While when we delegate a horizontal slice of work to someone, it can only be checked by experts. Now, this also has a tremendous impact on responsibility. You know, in the agile space, we talk a lot about responsibility, where there's a responsibility process. And what is very often happening, and this is what I tried to kind of tell you what would happen if I asked my kids to always only peel potatoes. Basically, this is what happened to me and happens to a lot of young professionals who become a manager of people. Basically, they ask other people to just do tasks. And so they become better at their task. They become better at potato peeling. However, that leaves still them in the coordinating role. So they have to coordinate. They say, you peel the potatoes and you season the potatoes and you put them into the hot water to boil them and put the timer, and you will then do the next step. So this coordination task is still left with the manager. And as long as you give people horizontal tasks, they will, at best, become better potato peelers. They will never start thinking about the whole thing. And this is something we call the micromanagement trap, because no one wants to become a micromanager, but that's what's happening. That is what's happening. In my family, this sometimes happens to me. Like when maybe you can check whether this ever happened to you. Like imagine someone asks you to cut a tomato or potato, all right, for a burger, for example, and my reaction is, oh, how thin should I cut them? You want me to cut the tomato? How thin should I cut this tomato? Right? And then the reaction of my partner would be, well, how thin do you like them on the burger? Right? And this little conversation, it shows you everything. When you're asked to do just one little horizontal slice of work, what is automatically not transferred to you is the ownership, is the responsibility for the whole result. It requires something extra, even in this simple example. So when you want to get out of this micromanagement trap, and that's maybe something you're now realizing is at play in your organization, it's really important to give people the whole picture of the final result, what you want to have in the end. And right, that's all. Just because of time, I want to move on because I would love to have also some time for your questions at the very end. The final question is, let's talk about not delegation, but let's talk about checking the progress. All right. So imagine you're cooking a dish for the very, very first time. For me, for example, it was the tiramisu at some point, and you've checked off 8 of the 10 individual steps of the recipe. So each individual step is basically a horizontal activity, right? It's a horizontal task. The whole tiramisu is the vertical task. Now, does this represent real, sure progress? And I would like you to give a thumbs up if you think this is real progress. I've done 8 of 10 individual steps, so I'm definitely progressed at some point. And you can say thumbs down if you say, no, this is not real progress for the very creative recipe. So what do you think? Is it real progress or is it not real progress? If you've checked off 8 of the 10 individual steps in the recipe at your right. Yeah. I see a lot of thumbs up and some thumbs down. That's also my experience from my trainings, where I also very often ask this question. But more thumbs down. And thumbs down is the right answer. At least to me, when the first time I created the tiramisu, there is one of the very last steps is to put this biscuit into the coffee, the strong espresso, and if you let it if you let it in this liquid for too long, it basically devolves afterwards. And so what you get is not a tiramisu that you like. And what happened to me basically was I had a tiramisu that I had to, my family did eat it, but I normally if I would have offered it to a client, they would have thrown it away. So what does it mean to us? When you are doing something for the very first time, when you're doing something unforeseeable, something where you can expect surprises to happen, it does not show you real progress when you are checking off individual activities. This changes when you're doing the recipe for the 10th time, right? Now, when I create tiramisu, I know all the ins and outs of this recipe. Now, how does it connect to organizations? Well, imagine you are a sponsor of a project, and there is a project manager, and they tell you, well, we have there's 1,000 different activities. They all have to be done until we are ready. And at some point, they've checked off 8 of the 10. In this case, it's not 8 of 10, but 800 of 1,000 different activities that have had to be fulfilled. And suddenly they realize, oh, my whole tiramisu is mush. I need to redo it, right? What happens then? Can they tell you the progress is now going slower? No, they cannot. And this is why this picture is there. This is exactly what we, at least what I typically know of Windows installations, let's say 20 years ago, right? So you have this slide. And it goes very fast in the beginning, like 10%, 20%, 30%, and it gets slower towards the end. And sometimes the step between 99% and 100% takes as much as the step between 0 and 99%. And that is exactly how many important managers do feel when managing projects. They have no idea. Why is that? Because no one could tell them, well, what we've done in the meantime, we have to change it. Right? So maybe if you recognize this symptom, it is typically a symptom of an organization that requires more small slices. Now, so what have we learned from this? If you are able to take a project and to break it down into small slices, you are able to have an overview, you are able to prioritize and change scope, you are able to create ownership and responsibility among the people, and you are able to have a reliable progress for power stakeholders, sponsors. So those are just the presence of simply being able to structure your endeavor into small slices. But how do we do it? Because what we typically do in our work is not just cooking a dinner. Now, this is what this whole book is about that I've written, and I would love to give you a very short, very simplified script of basically what needs to be done. What you need to do is, first of all, you cannot do it alone. You typically need a room with as many useful perspectives as possible about your project. And what you then have to do is you need to first immerse yourself in what is it that you want to do. You just spend half an hour or 20 minutes into imagining what will change once we are there, what all the different things. And there is different tools that you can use there. There is story mapping, impact mapping. There is other tools that you can use. If you know of any, use them there. It's just about immersing yourself into the project. And then the important step is identify what if the project has failed. What are the different scenarios and risks and unknowns we can imagine where the project will fail? If you do that, you typically will realize that there are some scenarios that are just artificial, and some scenarios that are actually areas where we haven't done something like that before. And if you do, the next step would be to think, so what are those most significant unknowns and risks with a high amplitude? And the next question is, what results could we deliver, small results that we could deliver within a week that could prove that this risk isn't there, that this risk won't happen? Or maybe if it does happen, it will show us that this risk will actually happen very, very early, which will allow us to also adapt, right? And this phase, this fifth step where you ideate about like what could be those results, this is the hard one. This is why the book's called The Art, because there is a little craftsmanship to it. There is a couple of rules, couple of examples you can follow, principles. However, there is no perfect way of doing it. The more often you do it, the better you become at this art. And the next step is typically when you realize, oh yeah, this is the result we need to do, and you ask yourself, well, how long do we need to take to do it? Typically the answer will be still, it's going to be months or half a year. There is no way to reduce it. Then this becomes this tight moment when you need to look, what can we reduce about this result? And I realize now I have 1 or 2 minutes. One, for example, easy way to be, and one of the ways that this has been applied in this example with the agency, with a public agency, was basically tremendously reduce the scope of people you want to change something in the very beginning. Instead of going for everyone or for whole of US, just go for one city or go for one district in a city and try it out there. That's a very standard strategy. Another strategy to reduce to reduce the size of such a slice would be to do things that don't scale. It's a term coined by Paul Graham, a very famous startup founder and startup advisor, and basically it says, well, when you start off with something, don't try to build a structure, don't try to build infrastructure in the beginning. Basically try to do things manually. So in this case, this group of people who would normally never go into such a building with refugees and try to offer anyone something new, they actually went there and did it themselves, thereby getting this first-hand experience. And they wouldn't do that afterwards when rolling out all this change over the 300 buildings. However, they did it in the beginning. So do things that don't scale is another way of reducing the size of such a slice. There is many more. And generally, once you do it, once you created a small slice, well, you basically act on it, inspect, and adapt, right? Whatever. What else would you expect from a Scrum trainer to see at the very end of a presentation? All right. And so if you want to see more, read more about examples, see more benefits, understand more principles behind the art of slicing work, there is the book out there. There is a website with also some cheat sheets. I think there is also a newsletter on the website. If you sign up, you get the first chapter for really, really to hear your questions about all these kinds of slicing methods and projects outside of product development. Molly.
All right.
I hope you are here to help me.
I am back. So how do you help your teams break down tickets into more manageable chunks? Sometimes my team says there's no way to break it down smaller.
Yeah. So there is not one easy answer to this. Typically, what we want to start off with is the impact. So that is, and that's kind of the main idea. When we have a slice of work, when we have a dish, we ask ourselves, what do we want to achieve with what we are creating, right? So if in a simplified product development environment, this would be a feature, right? So what is the impact that we want to see with this feature? And an impact is defined by what behavior of people do we want to change. Now, if people now say the feature that we want to implement is just too big, then ask them, well, this is the impact that we want to create. What are some smaller things? What are some parts of the feature that we are thinking about that would still have a chance of delivering this impact? And if there is nothing that happens, again, there is just some standard strategies like do things that don't scale. There is a number of standard strategies that come out of the lean startup movement. They are like fake door prototype, concierging. I'm just just giving buzzwords here in the hopes of you being able to Google them. That's not the time won't be enough to show you. But the main idea is to, and I guess if you have the book, you have more examples of this. The main idea is to give them examples to get their juices flowing, to get their ideas flowing. Because typically today, especially when you're dealing with software, and I imagine this question comes from people dealing with software because of the word ticket. That's what I expect. When you're dealing with software, today, taking more than a week to deliver anything is just not useful. And maybe there's one thing that comes to mind. One thing that I do all the time with software development teams is an exercise created by Alistair Coburn and perfectly protocolized by Henrik Nieberg. It's called Elephant Carpaccio. And if you just Google Elephant Carpaccio, you will find a perfect guide that will tell you what to do with your team. And it's 1.5 hours exercise that will teach them to slice software stuff into so small slices that it's really a carpaccio. If you're familiar with this dish, it's very thin slices of meat. I hope that's good enough an answer.
No, definitely. So our next question, when the scope is not properly fixed, then how do you slice the task, especially in the alignment of epics and sprint velocity as an associate product manager?
You're right. Again, the same thing that I just said is the most important part. You need to, before you start slicing, you need to first kind of get the perspective. What is the impact that we are trying to achieve with this thing? So the scope is typically not fixed. That is, that's a good thing. If everyone understands the scope is not fixed, that's a good thing, because we never know what are going to be the changes that we need to perform in order for our customers or our stakeholders to act differently. But if our focus is on them acting differently, for example, if my focus with the dinner is on my guests being fed, and if I know some of them are vegans and some of them are vegetarians, and I still want them to be happy and have an entree and have a main dish and have a dessert that is suitable for them, that is what I'm kind of focused on. I'm focused on a certain impact, and from there on, I will see, well, I can decide which of the slices, which of the features that we want to deliver, which of the results that we want to deliver actually helps us move the needle on this particular impact and which not.
Great. Can you share any experience with slicing a project when the team is from an outside vendor?
Well, let me think. Well, so when you have an outside vendor, there are certain the difficulty about this question is about the contract actually with this outside vendor. That's at least in my experience. So I have two I would say frameworks that I know that do work. And first it's, when the outside vendor is simply providing you with people and they are working in your company and you basically can manage them all, then there is actually not much difference to if those were your own employees. And the second difference is if the outside vendor is actually providing you with a whole team, and this team has the right mindset, and they are not, they're kind of with it. They're kind of with you on this, and you share the risk of you both not getting the impact. So my example, because the question is about an example, my example is I was at some point in my life, I was the co-CEO of a startup, and we had to completely redo all of the software in this case, because at the end of 1 month, the software has taken the money from our client 50 times instead of once. And so we were really kind of, we were really afraid of losing the license to actually take, from the payment companies to be able to actually take money. And then we realized all of the, all of the code that has been written is really not something we can rely on at all. So I've looked for different vendors, and I had one vendor which they've been working, in my words, in quite an agile way. So what they've told me is I had a list of things that I want clients to do on my platform, and basically they told me, Anton, of all the 50 things that you've written here, the first 25, we're really sure we can deliver this within your budget, because this is standard. This is kind of every platform out there wants new clients to sign up and to change their password and something like that. However, those 25 to items 25 to 50, we're not sure how much we're going to get there. However, we can tell you for sure within your budget, we will not let you stand in the rain. You won't have an unfinished platform, and we will say, well, sorry, we have to move on. We will do what we can. However, you will get much more if you're able to give us feedback every day, because we deliver our software every day to this staging server. And if you check it, if you give us feedback within 1 day, we can learn much faster than if you just do it once a week. So I was there every day giving them feedback, because I knew I will get more for my money, right? And this worked out for me pretty well. And these guys, I mean, the slicing there is not as difficult because it was basically software slicing, and you can find a lot of you can find a lot of things online about how to slice user stories, right? There is a user story splitting cheat sheet. There is elephant carpaccio. There is patterns like tracing bullet or the walking skeleton, which are really, really useful patterns to slice work when you're dealing with software.
All right. When dealing with stakeholders, do you have a set of questions you ask yourself to make sure you know the differences and are able to prioritize your deliverables?
Mm-hmm. So when it comes to prioritization, the main question that I'm using is first of all the question that I've already presented you with. The thing is, imagine this project has gone wrong. You may have experienced similar projects. What has not worked out there? Imagine this particular project failing, just for 10 minutes. We don't want that to happen, but just for 10 minutes, what are the different scenarios that you can see this project failing? That's a really, really powerful question, because once a stakeholder defines this risk and it comes from them, and then afterwards you come up with a result, with a slice that actually reduces this risk, they know exactly why you want to have an iteration. You don't have to tell them anything about Scrum. You don't have to tell them anything about agility. And that's why I kind of also call this book The Art of Slicing Work. I don't want this book. You won't find Scrum tech terminology in there. You won't find agile terminology in there, because I don't want. This is not the primary question. I believe when people start focusing on delivering small results fast, most of the rest of the Scrum structure, most of the rest of our learning cycle will automatically emerge. That's at least my experience. So returning to the question, how could this project fail? Another question that could work if those stakeholders are closer to the subject matter, you could ask them, what areas of the project are unknown to us? What is the new thing we're trying here? What is new about this thing? And those areas will typically be the ones where you can expect surprises. The problem with surprises is they're unknown. So you will never know what will surprise you. So you can ask questions, but the problem is you will never know what will surprise you. Otherwise, it won't be a surprise, right?
All right. I've got a few more questions. So someone asked, what do you recommend when you have a team that is back-end production support only? They don't work with features, only fires to be put out and technical debt.
Well, so this is obviously component structure, right? So what if we already kind of inherited this structure and you feel that you can't do anything about it? The best advice that I have is try to synchronize the dependencies. So typically, in order for such an organization to deliver something valuable to a client, would be that this backend has made some changes to the system. However, some other part of the system that is consuming what this backend people have created has also made some change. Now, if you can not change the structure of the organization, but kind of push for them to synchronize, to work synchronously on their parts, then there is a chance for them to deliver this thing, to deliver a result faster. And if you are able to have the conversation that we've just had during this webinar with the people expecting results from them, or maybe some of those symptoms that you've seen that I've shown, you can recognize in your organization, that may be a starter for a conversation. Because once the management of the organization realizes what is actually counting for us, what actually moves the needle is a delivered slice, they will automatically at some point realize that this backend difference is most often not really helping as a structural element.
So I think you touched on this a little bit with a previous answer, but someone wants to know, how do you combine this approach with risk management?
So, okay, there's risk management and risk management. So in a typical project, like very classical project, as far as I know, right, is that what we do in the beginning of a project, we basically ask ourselves, what are the different risks that are involved in the project? How probable are these risks to occur? And what would be our mitigation strategies? And then when we've done that, we're kind of prepared. And when a risk happens, right, we kind of immediately implement our mitigation strategy. Now, doing this is kind of a different approach. It's as if you say, well, you know what? What I'm dealing with is so unpredictable. I expect a lot of different things to show up within this endeavor anyway. So instead of planning, I will try to identify the most probable risk, and I will try to de-risk it. So instead of acting as if my plan will work out, but there is a couple of risks that may happen on the way, I am not planning for I'm not even thinking about my plan to work out. I'm saying I will tackle the risks one by one right from the beginning. So it's kind of, it's a different strategy of addressing risks. If you think about risk management, this is one very different way of explaining agile to higher senior management. You could say agility is just basically risk management that drives your project, right? You drive your project by risk management. You just take the risks one at a time and you reduce them until there is no more risk and you can just implement the rest. It's also an answer to what is hybrid project management, basically, right? You begin with reducing the risks in delivering such vertical slices, and at some point when you know things are reduced, all the risks are reduced, you can implement.
All right, so we are nearing the end of our time. So I want to thank everybody who put wonderful questions in the Q&A. Another huge thank you to Anton for hosting an amazing webinar on slicing work. So in case you joined a little late or just need a reminder, we will be sending out an email tomorrow with a link to the on-demand recording of the webinar, as well as a link to claim your Scrum education unit if you are a Scrum Alliance member. Otherwise, thank you all so much for joining us today. It was a great webinar, and we hope you join us for our next webinar in a few weeks. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.